Welcome to A Fresh Face in Hell. I'm your host, Jonathan Evison. Every week we talk to somebody new and interesting, somebody intellectually curious, somebody who will hopefully renew our faith in this cold, cruel world we live in. A Fresh Face in Hell. Today, I'm really pleased to have with us New York Times bestselling author and all-around great guy, Jamie Ford, who is the author of 4 major works of fiction, including the massively successful The Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, and most recently, The Many Daughters of Afong, which is the book that we will be concentrating mostly on today because we want to talk about generational trauma and traumatic memory and epigenetics and our personal traumas and so forth. Not only is Jamie an amazing and brilliant writer, but he's one of the greatest guys I know. He's funny, he's warm, he's a great conversationalist, great drinking buddy. So I'm really, really pleased to have him. So hello, Jamie. Thanks for being here, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me. I like to be a fresh face in hell. It's like checking a box for me.
So I was going to make you do kind of talk to us, give us a synopsis of the book, but then I realized how much I hate that myself. So I went ahead and saved you that. I want to talk about The Many Daughters of Afong Moy.
Yeah. She was the first Chinese woman to come to America. She came here in the 1830s. And for like a hot moment, she was the most famous woman in America. She performed in all these sold out clubs from like Toronto to Cuba. There were racing horses named after her. There were poems written about her. She went to the White House and met President Andrew Jackson at his request. And all of this excitement about her, it kind of obfuscates the reality that, she wasn't here willingly.
Yeah, her life was like a gallery of horrors.
Yeah, I mean, the only time we hear from her is through her handlers, and these are all the people who have monetized her otherness. You know, she had bound feet, and she would dress in, these elegant Chinese costumes, but she really was kind of there's a sideshow element of her existence. And I always wanted to write about her, but her story is pretty sad. I mean, she's super famous. She's in all these newspaper articles, more than 200 newspaper articles, and then she just vanishes. And then there's a few over the years. There's a few newspaper articles that sort of trickle out, and the last one is someone reports seeing her abandoned in a poorhouse in New Jersey, and that's it. And I kind of wanted to give her a voice, if you will, through subsequent generations. I mean, at the time, it was illegal for Chinese women to leave China. So she wasn't here as this like intrepid world traveler. She wasn't this cultural ambassador. She existed at a time in China where excess daughters were, they were a liability, not a benefit. And she was, in all likelihood, sold into this service. And according to the people who talked about her, she was promised she would go home in 2 years, and that never happened.
And so explain the bound feet for me, exactly how this works, because,
Yeah. There are some other books, fiction and nonfiction, that really do a deep dive into the process of taking a very young girl and curling their toes back, and then taking leather strips that are wet. They wrap it, and then as the leather dries, it constricts and gets tighter. And they literally break the bones of the feet and the toes, and they do it again and again and again over a number of years so that the feet resemble a lotus. And it was seen as it was culturally attractive. Aesthetically, but also it was seen as upper class, if you will, because peasants didn't have bound feet. But it really hobbled the women, and so who had, no rights, no voice anyway. And this limited their ability to move, to work, to do a lot of things. So there's really a kind of a sad chapter in history where we, crippled generations of women.
It's interesting to me that it was actually culturally, it was attractive. It reminds me, was it the Mayans who would elongate the foreheads? But yeah, when I first heard that her feet were bound, I was, I thought of like misery or something, or like they were hobbling her because she was, they didn't want her to run away or something. So, I mean, so did she grow up in a family that was,
Well, it's believed that since she had bound feet, she must have been at least merchant class. So she wasn't, she wasn't impoverished. So her family had some means, and the fact that she was sold to American merchants, and that sort of leans into the idea that her father must have interacted with the West through, for importing and exporting and things like that. And he exported his own child, if you will. It's really, it's something that I've wanted to write about, but again, it sounds so tragic and so sad, and I didn't know what to do with it until I sort of stumbled upon, an article or two about inherited trauma and epigenetics and stuff like that, and then the idea kind of fell together that I can ripple her trauma through a bunch of different generations, and maybe subsequent generations can mitigate that trauma.
Yeah. So basically, her treatment is, the fictional treatment is kind of a cognitive restructuring, which allows her to not only make sense of their traumatic memories. And I know there's a similar treatment that actually exists where they try to restructure the cognitive faculties so they can make sense of it. But in the case of Dorothy, she's actually able to sort of almost communicate with them through this therapy.
Yeah, I created just a science fictional therapy that allows someone to remember the past. As soon as I put it in the book, like people would email me like, is that real? Because I would really look into that. Like, I hope my insurance covers that. I would participate in something like that for sure. And the idea for that came from, in the book, I talk about epigenetics, and this is where I'm going to like put everyone to sleep with a moment of
And
science.
No, I'm fascinated by it.
Brace yourselves. Everyone go get a second cup of coffee. But there was a thing called optogenetics where they basically transferred a memory from one lab animal to another. They didn't literally transfer it over a wire like in a Frankenstein movie or something like that, but they put in a lab animal in an MRI, and unfortunately they have a traumatic, I'm not sure exactly what they did, but probably used electricity, sort of zap this creature, and they take a snapshot of what's going on in the brain. It's called an engram. Like, a memory isn't just one thing. It's a whole bunch of areas of the brain firing all at once. One area is sensory, one area is emotional, one area is rational, that kind of stuff. They take a picture of that, and then they took the rat and they injected the rat's brain with a light reactive protein. And then they used light to fire those areas of the brain to replicate what happened and was recorded in the MRI. And so it sounds like we've transferred this horrible memory from one animal to another, but I thought, what if you did that and it was someone's first kiss, and you capture that engram of how the brain's lighting up, and then you can replicate that in another person's brain. What if you're an Alzheimer's patient and you have recorded memories in the past and you reactivate them through this process later in life when you're, have dementia and things like that. So I don't know, I just kind of wandered into this strange wilderness of quasi-science and then envisioned what this might be in the future. And then I'd use that as this future technology in the book.
Yeah, when it started to, I did a little research on epigenetics, and when it started to sort of make sense to me was that when I realized that epigenetic changes, they don't alter the DNA sequence, they simply change how your body reads the DNA sequence. So that's where the experience part of it comes in, because I was trying to separate this idea of what we call epigenetics with, like, how is that different than instinct? Or like Rupert Sheldrake had that pseudoscientific theory called morphic resonance, where he believed that like a priori knowledge existed in these fields. So, and he had that example of those. There was a bird that would open the milk bottles in Germany, and the bird's lifespan was just several years, but the milk service stopped for like 10 or 12 years. in the 30s and 40s. And then, but as soon as the milk service, started again, these, future generations of these birds had memorized this behavior. I'm just curious how, what we call instinct, and we don't refer to human beings when we talk about this much, but animals, everything, we don't give animals any credit for like any kind of abstract thinking or anything. And it's like, I'm just trying to figure out like, I mean, epigenetics makes total sense to me. You still refer to it as a pseudoscience, but like, I mean, it makes.
Oh, I don't really mean pseudoscience. I mean the amalgamation of this treatment that I created in a future context in the book. The bones of epigenetics, that's pretty accepted. But I combined a couple technologies and created a new therapeutic modality, if you will, in the future.
Yeah, well, it worked because as you know, as a novelist, you have to be convincing enough to get me to take that leap of suspension of disbelief, and there was enough real science in it, and the more I kind of looked into it, there are therapies that try to not exactly mirror the experience as in the case of your book, but like I said, it's just sort of therapy. Like in your life, I mean, are you willing to kind of talk about how you grew up, or I don't want to put you on the spot, like, because I mean, you and I have had a lot of personal conversations about our personal traumas, and you had a really fascinating, childhood.
Yeah, I'm pretty transparent with all this stuff. Even before, I've had lots of therapy and things like that. But before that, my wife would say, I have terminal honesty. Just ask me, I'll tell you. Like, I don't care.
That's why that's why we're simpatico. We just constantly, Jamie and I are both people that get in front of crowds and overshare. And I don't know about you, but I go home and I'm just full of self-loathing. Like, did I just tell a theater full of people that I struggle with erectile dysfunction? Did I just tell everybody that I sucked a kid's dick in 4th grade? And then they're laughing and they think, oh, it's so refreshing and raw. He's so real and authentic. But then I go home and I just want to crawl under a rock. You know what I mean? It's just like, don't you have any self-control? That's why I love myself on the page, because I can edit myself. But you put a microphone in front of me and there I am talking about 4th grade blowjobs again.
I feel all that, and it's and I'm sure you do the same thing. You go and you're on a stage, and then afterwards people are like, "You're so funny," and I'm like, deep down I'm thinking humor is a self-defense mechanism developed over a lifetime of emotional pain. That's why comedians are like the most depressed people you'll ever meet when they're not on stage.
It's gotta hurt to be funny.
Yeah, and it's personally, I'll just sort of jump to the end here. What we're kind of referencing is, and I had talked to you a little bit about this earlier, is that I finally went away to what I call trauma camp. After, kind of having therapy over the years and trying different modalities, EMDR, all these things that are very trendy right now. And it was always like just putting Band-Aids on a sucking chest wound. You could kind of stop the bleeding, but eventually become a problem. And I was like you, I'd be on tour and it never made sense, because I'd be on stage and there's all these, hundreds of people, and they tell you they love your work and you've entertained them. And then you get back to your hotel room and it's basically you just, sitting around in your underwear, eating vending machine Pop-Tarts, hating life. And you're like, why am I so depressed when I have a small measure of success that most authors would love to have.
Yeah, but you become tied to it, right? It's like, it's kind of a sort of torture, because I mean, your talking points, what's going to get a laugh. So it's kind of like a comedian. They know the material. And so like, you're kind of beholden to it, because that's what they're going to like the best. You got to give the people what they want. But like,
yeah, when your whole life becomes a bit, you've done something wrong, and it really felt like I was just doing dance monkey dance. And now I guess in many ways I am, but I'm able to be present. I'm able to enjoy it. I'm able to appreciate where I am, and I'm not just perpetually haunted by childhood trauma. For anyone out there who's dealt with childhood or adulthood trauma. There's are you familiar with the ACE scale, adverse childhood experiences? It's a scale of 1 to 10. Um, I was a 9. Yeah, well, I was a 9 until I figured out that my dad was in prison. My dad was in San Quentin. And one of the question is, do you have a parent that has spent any time incarcerated? I'm like, boom, that checks that box. I am a perfect 10 now. It also explains some of my, my dad's behavior and things like that. But yeah, I grew up in a loving yet dysfunctional family. And I think that's really hard for a lot of people to reconcile. It's usually not, abuse or verbal abuse, physical abuse, whatever, and nothing else. It's interspersed with joy and laughter and love and moments where, people think you have this amazing home life and that's the only home life and growing up, that's your normal. And then you grow up and you have habits. I had suicidal ideation as a 4th grader. I didn't realize that wasn't normal. I just figured I'm an artsy, weird kid and this is part of the job and I'll just lean into my art. And I describe it as monetizing your pain. Like you write about it, you write songs about it, you channel it into dance, you write it on the page, you do poetry, whatever it is. But monetizing your pain, while it can, make you a little more comfortable, it doesn't make the pain go away.
Interesting. Yeah. I find that I can work through things doing it that way. I mean, I think we're, as novelists, we're empaths, and writing fiction, it allows me a degree of separation. So maybe I don't necessarily feel that I'm digging through my own, digging up my own bones and dusting them off, but I kind of am. And it's funny that you would say monetize it, because I never really, that's kind of the end result. But I always kind of thought of it as a sort of self-therapy in a way. Like if I allow myself this little bit of distance, I can explore all the stuff that troubles me. Like I've written, and you return to these themes again and again, like the death of a child. My sister died in a freak car accident on her 16th birthday, and she was my primary caregiver. And so, like in Revised Fundamentals of Caregiving, I explore what that looks like. And again, in The Heart of Winter, even though I don't want to, I kind of return to these themes. They've almost become tropes for me because I'm still working through them. Like John Irving has incest and bears. I have like deadbeat dads and dying children. What are those themes for you?
Like, I romantically say it as, I try to break the reader's heart on the page and then I put the pieces back together in better working condition. That's a great soundbite for an interview, we have these sound bites, but the reality is I would write these very traumatic scenes and they would kind of wreck me for a while. My second book, which is my most, Songs of Willow Frost, which is my darkest book, and I didn't even know how dark it was as I was writing it until afterwards. And people were like, "Are you okay?" Like, you really went to a dark place. It's not super graphic or anything, but it's a redemptive story. I think most of mine are, but it definitely wanders into some weird territory.
Was that your hardest book to write?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that was. At the time, I wasn't on antidepressants. I hadn't seen a therapist for a number of years. And then, my wife noticed it right away. She's like, "I think we need to get you scheduled with somebody." And it helped. It was kind of manageable. But with my third book, I went out on a 38 city book tour, which is insane.
I've been there. Yeah, it's dehumanizing.
Yeah, about halfway through it, my wife is talking to my therapist, like, do we bring him home and send him somewhere inpatient because he's not doing well? And no one could tell on stage.
But what does that look like? If you don't mind, God love you. But I know I'm not to exploit you here, but I know you can't help yourself.
No.
You're just going to tell me.
No.
But like, what did that look like? I got you in your underwear back at the hotel room. For me, that would be like scrolling through my phone, looking pictures of my kids and just hating myself and just feeling like a failure in every way. What did that look like for you? Because I've been on the road like that, and I know it takes so much out of you. And like you said, you're playing, performing monkey up there. And so what did that look like for you when your wife was like, do we bring him home? Like you were calling her and expressing your...
Yeah, I mean, it was, and unfortunately, it was a time where she was really busy with her own travel. So we're crossing paths, and it's no fault of her own. Like, we're talking as much as logistically possible. But she reached out to one of my good friends and was like, "Can you check on him every day, just to make sure he's okay?" And what was happening was, when I was a little kid, from like the fourth grade until that moment, in the back of my mind, I always thought the end of my story would be me taking my own life. I just thought I'm an artist, I lean into the stuff, sort of dance with the devil, and eventually it catches up and something happens and you just can't take it anymore. But I was just existing in this cloud where I'm on the plane, and sorry passengers, I don't have nothing against you, but when we were having turbulence, I was like, please crash the plane. Please just fly it into a fucking mountain, because I can't take this anymore.
Oh, dude, I want to hug you right now. You poor fucking guy.
I'm feeling much better now. But it was that kind of thing. I remember I checked into a hotel, and our publishers will put us in nice hotels. And I was on like the 19th floor, and I had a balcony, and I had them put me on the second floor because I just didn't want to be tempted to jump off or something like that. And it would come and go. It wasn't like...
It's going to be so hard for people to conceive, this the idea of depression. People don't understand. They're like, a lot of it's just biochemical, and as we're in experiential, and possibly, as we're discussing here, intergenerational trauma that you really had no control over. And people will look at your life and go, dude, you're like a mega New York Times bestselling author. You crack people up every day. The old white-haired ladies just love you. I've seen it. Me too. That's our audience. And,
you too.
And it's hard for people to conceive what that looks like. Like, you'll get that, like, it's almost like you don't have a right to go dark and have suicidal ideations or your life is perfect.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it worse. Yeah, and I think
like
that's
you don't deserve
why...
it. Do you feel that? Like,
when Robin Williams killed himself, Anthony Bourdain, Chris Cornell, Chester Bennington, all these people are wildly successful. And every time I would read about them, I'm like, I know exactly what that feels like.
Yeah, it never surprised me.
Yeah, it doesn't. And people think their lives are perfect. They're not perfect. They're just different, and they have a level of fame. Anthony Bourdain was beloved by everyone, but lived out of a suitcase for 15 years. And the thing with trauma is, and what going to trauma camp did for me is they had some interesting modalities to address it, but it was always like the tiger was chasing me no matter what. Like, it was right there.
Yeah, that's what trauma does, is relives itself again and again and again. It just wants to retell the same stories, and you can't escape them.
It took some good work to basically park it in the memory space of my brain. So it's there, it's reconciled, it happened, existed, I can look back on it, but it's not present. I don't feel that stress, that panic, that anxiety, that fear, that worry, that kind of stuff that all aggregates into this thing, a chemical imbalance we call depression. And it's interesting. I went away, I came back, and it was such an incredible transformative experience. And I wasn't sure. It's like, is this a honeymoon phase? Like, is this just going to wear off? And I really didn't talk to anybody. I didn't even talk to my kids about it or anything, or my friends, until about 6 months later.
I think that's about the time you and I did an event together. And we talked backstage for a long time about some of these subjects. And I think that was about 6 months after you'd come back from trauma camp. What do they actually call it? Because I've been referring to it as trauma camp.
I think we should just call it trauma camp.
I think so. I mean, but what do they call it? Like,
it was like the intensive trauma workshop at a retreat center type of place. And it was an organization that has one facility for eating disorders, and in another state they have a facility for, a specific kind of abuse. And then there's
tons of alcoholics and...
Yeah, exactly. And this was a place that was to deal with really just childhood trauma. And I did not want to go. my my therapist suggested it, um, and I thought, like, it's going to be a bunch of like rich people with, and I grew up, very
Kind of like a writing workshop, you mean? Where it's like,
yeah,
who else can afford $3,500 to.
exactly. And I'm like, you and I both grew up working class poor, and I'm like, I don't know if I can relate to these people. And it
Or
ended up,
was it that? Were they those people?
no, it was everything. Like, and my therapist assured me, she's like, no, this is where I send guys that come back from Iraq, and they're, 20 years old, kind of a thing. And I went, and it was like every walk of life. There was very successful people. There was, a young kid who, had like he worked out on an oil rig somewhere. And he's probably right out of high school. And his brother had gone and recommended it, that he went there. We don't know anybody's last names. I'm not sharing other people's stories. I'm speaking very generally and sort of altering the facts here. So hope your listeners don't stress out about that. But it's really interesting because I came back, and like a week later, Kevin Smith, the director who did Clerks and all that, he did a 45-minute interview with People Magazine, because he went to an identical facility in Arizona, just like I did. And he was just like, people go to these places all the time. No one talks about it. So I'm going to talk about it. And so that was really, I went to this place where I didn't want to go. I was afraid it was going to just crack me open in a way that I couldn't put myself back together.
And that's a real concern for males in our culture. I think this is kind of I think this is what's wrong with so many men, is why they're dysfunctional, is because they're literally socialized not to go to these places, and it's a sign of weakness to go to these places, and just suck it up, pull up your bootstraps, and walk on, boy.
Yeah, and I'm half Chinese, and in Asian families, it's not discussed.
Stoicism is a big part of your.
Yeah, and it was weird. I fly to this place in Arizona. I'd filled out a 20-page, 20 pages of questions regarding my family and my childhood history. And just going through that was pretty stressful. And I arrive at the airport. It's late at night, and they pick us up. And there was only like two, I think there were three of us that they were picking up at the time. And, we're all in our own clouds of shame. We didn't want to, talk to anyone, but we also didn't want to violate their space. We're all just sort of like, insular in our experiences as we're standing there waiting for our luggage. And they drive us, a couple hours to the place, and we really didn't talk to each other, just said hi or introduce yourself. And then when they drove us back to the airport, when this was all said and done, there were like 15 of us in the van, and we were just celebrating. We're just like, woo, trauma camp. We were just like, we were having the greatest time, and we all knew each other fairly well. And it
sounds amazing. Like I got to feel like when you're on that bus on the way there, like you're saying, everybody's trying to be insular and not, but like there's got to be this creeping awareness that after a week, I'm going to know everything about these people.
Yeah, or they're going to know everything about me.
There's going to be a lot of sharing in circles. And is that what it looked like? Was it a lot of kind of group therapy where you shared your story like an NA meeting kind of thing? Or was it more of a like one at a time and then maybe join a group? Like, I just want to know what the therapy looks like.
It was a big group. There's probably 15 guys, 15 women. We did have group therapy, which were divided by, male and female. The first day or two was really lecture, and it was like, different definitions of abuse. It's easy to think of physical abuse or sexual abuse or verbal abuse, but there's just weird things. Like I co-parented myself. I shared a checkbook with my mom at age 14 and worked and paid bills, and she was sometimes gone. And I didn't realize, that was kind of a burden. Yeah, that was my normal, but I didn't have a normal high school experience. You you shouldn't have to co-parent yourself. You know what I mean? And
I didn't even have a co-parent. I was just like running free. I was the ultimate latchkey kid. But I did feel like, I think I probably felt, even with a single mom who was kind of a kook. I mean, she was clinically depressed herself and had lost her, outlived one of her children, and her husband of 25 years just up and left her because he couldn't handle it. But the one thing I will say that I feel really lucky about is that I always felt loved and I had this safety net. But like, her behavior was, trying to burn lampshades and walking around with one of her boobs hanging out and like, looking out the window, laughing hysterically and then crying. And like, but like what you were saying earlier about there was still a love there, and people, we forget that, love and hate or love and pain are not opposites. It's like apathy. Apathy is the opposite of that love. So sometimes it's hard for people to get the brain around that you can be living in traumatic situations, but at the same time, there can be joy there, and there can be love there, and there can be a modicum of normalcy.
when you get both at once, it's very confusing. So like my dad told me he loved me every single day, very affectionate, kind, but he was also super violent. And those two messages going on at the exact same time, it made me for a very twitchy child. It was just like I didn't know when the ice was going to break.
Right, walking on eggshells.
Yeah, and they, it was interesting. We're listening to these lectures. There was one instructor that, I was just blown away. I was just so impressed with, what she's talking about. And then when they broke us up into our individual groups that we worked with for the whole duration, and I rolled in and there's like me and 5 other guys, and we're all like, yeah, we all love this person. This is the person we were hoping we'd end up with. And we looked around, and after her story started coming out, we're like, oh, we got her because we're the worst cases. We are, yeah, we're in a club no one wants to be a member of. But they did if you go to your therapist, there's a lot of therapeutic modalities. And they learn these things and they implement these things in a clinical environment. At trauma camp, it was founded by people who are the experts in this field. And so they're using customized modalities for you. And some of them are so new, they're not used in anyone's therapeutics. They're not in the therapist's office.
Because it's based on your 20-page, the information you gave them going into this and what they've learned about you. And so they tailor it to each person.
They did. It was, and it's a mix. Like I had 4 different type of things that they use together. But a couple of them it's just cutting edge, bleeding edge stuff that will be done in with everyone else's therapist in a couple of years when these people go do workshops and seminars and teach people and get them certified, and then they can implement these things in their own practices. So we were getting stuff I'd never heard of. And, yeah, and it's, it's adjacent to what you think normal, therapy would be like. But it sort of led up to a big thing, which was sort of an experiential, where it's sort of like going through a guided, you're not reliving the trauma, but you're addressing what age you were and what you needed at that age.
And what you weren't getting.
Yeah, and you sort of mentally give that version of you what they needed, and you go through all these benchmark moments in your life. And it was wild. Mine was like 2.5 hours.
Yeah, no, I can see how that'd be completely transformative. Like, giving yourself permission to love yourself and have these experiences that you never had access to. And
it was weird because it was like, it was addressing needs versus wants. And I think for so much of my life, my needs had not been met, and I just built them with wants, and those are not sustainable. Yeah, I got to a moment where I'm literally just like tears are streaming down my eyes. I'm like, is this what normal feels like? Like, wait, people get to feel like this all the time, just without crippling anxiety and, pervasive dread and, that kind of stuff. And
this makes me so happy for you, dude, because you deserve it. You're such a good dude.
Dude, it was so great. And while you're there, they also they let you try different things. So one night we did acupuncture, another night do Tai Chi, another night yoga, another night it's like biofeedback. They sort of let you try all these different ancillary things to kind of take home with you. So I came back and I did Tai Chi every day for months and months and months. And I still do, just as a way to, get into a really relaxed breathing headspace, that kind of stuff.
So back to the intergenerational element of this, like, I mean, one of the best, the conventional wisdom about trauma is the way to get over these intergenerational traumas is to break the cycle. And so, with me, like I said, I felt like I had a deadbeat dad. He just wasn't there for me. And so I didn't have a good model of how to father, right? And neither did you. And so the challenges, parenting, I mean, how was that? You hadn't gone through trauma therapy till your kids are grown. Your kids they're out into the world right now. I'm still dealing with a 7-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 15-year-old. But how was that for you? I mean, sometimes it's instructive to just only have a bad example, I guess. So like I just made, I felt like I made the opposite decisions at every juncture. Like if this is how you don't do it, then I'm going to do it this way. I'm just going to do the opposite thing my old man would do.
Yeah, I kind of did the same thing. Like my dad was checked out at about age 16. And my mom was great. I loved her. She did the best she could. Maybe not the best she could. She did what she did. That's kind of how I have to look at it. And but yeah, she was an alcoholic and would disappear for days at a time, kind of a thing. And so that gives you a weird perspective as a parent. So I'm going to do better than my parent and all these things. And in many ways I was, but there were times where like if I thought my partner was, behaving in a way that was even vaguely similar to my mom, it would just like totally freak me out. People would say triggered or however you want. But for me, it was just like an overcorrective fear reaction. I couldn't sleep. I was sick to my stomach. I'm stressed. The world's going to end, that kind of stuff as a parent.
Oh, I know it every night. Yeah, that's the thing. Fear. That's the word. It's like at 4 a.m, I'm afraid of everything. Last night I was up all night. I'm worrying about my 15-year-old son. In the morning I wake up and I go, you know what? It's really not that bad. He's making a few bad decisions and there's some behaviors that he needs to change, like his sleeping hours, his nutrition, things like that. But like, when that fear gets triggered, man, there's just no convincing yourself. Everything just seems so overwhelming.
And we're writers. We can tell ourselves stories, and they can be bad stories.
Yeah, and let's segue to writing there because, like, as writers, we trust the process. I mean, I'd venture to say that Afong Moy is your most ambitious book formally, structurally, right? And so lay people or readers are going to assume that was your hardest book to write. And like for me, what I found was, I'm pretty productive. I write a novel a year and something like Small World, which has got, 20 points of view and a bifurcated timeline. And like, it was actually the easiest book I ever wrote because I could get out of my own way, right? It was an exercise in imagination. It was like pure creativity. And that book wrote itself in like 8 months. And then, recently I've been struggling with a book like I never did before. And it's because my brother, who ended his own life about 4 or 5 years ago, he was a lounge entertainer. And, he died feeling like a failure and he could never understand that he was my hero. And he's like, he would never understand it because he was like, I'm a failure. I never made it. How can I be anybody's hero? He didn't understand that that's what I respected about him, is that he just kept punching in service of the work because that's what was really important. You know it. I know it. Being a New York Times bestseller is a cherry on top, but the work is the real gift. And so I started to write this book about him. And also, he's my older brother. He was kind of the family historian. And like, this is a really like first person close, almost a picaresque, right? This should be a walk in the park formally for me. But it took me 4 months to get through the first chapter. You know what I mean? Just because of the emotional content of the book, the formal stuff, you can just get out of your own way. But this book was so wrapped up in me. And, I trusted the process, even though it was different than any process I'd ever gone through. In 3 months, I'm usually, 120 pages into the book or something. And finally, after many nights, like crying by myself, listening to a Frank Lesser turn of phrase, or, listening to Cole Porter songs, stuff that I only shared with my brother, I finally gave myself permission to write what I had been viewing as his story. And I finally gave myself permission because, I just thought I could hear him up there going, oh, it wasn't that way. It wasn't that way. He wasn't there. I couldn't ask him. I had to give myself the permission to emotionally just view it differently and view it as like I wanted to write the story he deserved instead of his story, what I mean? So I had to dive into it more and frame it more as fiction, and I finally hit my stride on it. I mean, has that been, Afong Moy to the reader, I think seems like, I don't know, the reader doesn't have any way of knowing how closely tied to your personal trauma it may be. But I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what was the most challenging part of the book? Because formally, there's a lot of narrative daring too, with all the different points of view and this, generational memory, tying them together, all the different characters' points of view. What was harder? Was it the crafty elements of tying all those things together, or was it dealing with the emotional content?
It was both. It's six point of view characters, 6 time periods. So just weaving that all together, was like solving a Rubik's Cube. And that was just kind of tied my brain in knots. That was just a fundamental technical challenge. But the emotion stuff, I wasn't sure if I could land the plane. I wasn't sure if I could pull it off. So I was just riddled with self-doubt and riddled like, I've hit the wall. This is the length of my ability and my talent and my story. It was a weird journey. But for me, I write in third person close.
Me too. That's my favorite.
And that gives me a little bit of a distance. If I write in first person, then it gets a little strange. Like the one time I published a short story in first person, and it was a pretty serious story. A writer friend, the late Robert Hicks, he reached out to me. He was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like,
it sounds like you got good friends though, Jamie. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Writer friends are the best because they're the only ones that kind of understand this weird business. And we have, our work life is like that of the Unabomber. We're sequestered away and we're just kind of banging away, doing our thing in isolation. And then suddenly this thing we've created in isolation is just completely raw and exposed to the world, to our readers and to editors and to the press. And so it's this very strange journey. And it's hard explaining that to your friends who's like an engineer or a doctor or a bartender or a truck driver.
You're all of those things. That's what they don't understand.
It's funny when people are like, "Oh, you're a writer. That sounds like it's fun. Like we do it with crayons or something."
Yeah, I like when you get the Goodreads review that says, I don't know, after a while, it just seemed like the writer was making it up as he went along. It's like, funny you should mention that. I love all your work, but that one really, I think it was that formal challenge. It's this, when I like a book when I'm reading it and I can feel the writer testing themselves, all that madness, all that, am I pulling that off? All your self-doubt about that. Like, maybe it's because I'm a writer and I read that way. I don't know if the reader feels it, but as a writer reading that way, those are my favorite books, are the books where I feel like the thing itself can barely sustain the force of its own invention, that's what Moby Dick has. That's what, these books that you can just, it's palpably feel like you've got all these balls in the air. What's he going to do? And you pulled it off and you landed it. And I think that's why it's my favorite of your books. I like them all. I intuitively sort of trust your emotional tenor. I like that you can write about traumatic things, but similar to me, we offer, I think, a little more hope than we might even see in our own hearts at times. Like my friend Stuart Onan is, every time he reads my book, he's like, "God dang, man, you are a hopeful son of a gun." Because he's, or my Willie Vlotten, we write about the same people, but like, his character dies in the back of a truck bed. My guy, wakes up. That's a concerted effort on your part, is I guess what I'm asking, right? Like you feel you're somebody who feels like, uh, you kind of owe the world a little hope, maybe? Or am I, you know, your books tend to be, even if they're dark, there's a quality of uplifting to them.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, um, I definitely consider myself someone in the compassion creation business. I want to write books that give readers empathy muscles a workout, and I try to have a beat of redemption because I think that's what most of us aspire to. We don't aspire to to have our story end in tragedy. We aspire to rescue ourselves and those around us, and I try to do that on the page in in different ways. But I do think, and this is where I sound a little overly optimistic, but there is a deficit of compassion in our culture right now, more than ever. And I really feel if you can create a compassionate piece of art, whether that's a song or a play or a film or a book or a poem, and you inject that into the body of society in a tiny way, you can inoculate us against the things that bring us down. Racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, all the things that other people that we do to each other, that don't help any of the situations that we're in, that they just sort of fortify these destructive walls between everything.
And this is a tricky thing to do because, a lot of, especially beginning writers or people, they attack the novel as a sort of an authorial thing, and they feel that it's their job to edify the reader or persuade them with their worldview, and people end up writing polemical stuff. Where I kind of see our purpose is like to allow the reader to own the narrative, to allow them to jump through this empathic window and walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. And I feel like if I'm doing my job right, what I'm really doing is taking that, I'm having them, I'm allowing the reader to take that light of self-investigation and point it back in themselves. Like it's my job to get them asking themselves these questions and arrive at their own conclusions versus like just browbeat them. And that's, to me, that's what separates the great empathic books. The ones that really win your heart is the ones that you feel like the writer can get out of the way enough to let you own the narrative. And sometimes you will think back on these books and you will mix them up with your own experience. Like it becomes so real. The empathic experience of it becomes so real because the writer's so good at getting out of their own way and allowing me to take that light of self-interrogation and shine it on me and come to my own conclusions. So we're sort of, I don't know, maybe we're codependents or maybe, we're just more guides, I think, than like experts.
Yeah, it's, I never want to, and I'm sure the same way, we don't want to write morality plays and then, it's like a scale. We put our finger on the scale for effect. You nailed it. I want to have readers walk in someone else's shoes and experience something that they haven't experienced before. And I think that's an empathy enlarging experience. I think that's super beneficial internally and externally.
If for the writer too, like that's why I do it.
Yeah.
I wrote 7 books before anyone published me, and people are like, "Oh, so you just knew number 8 was the charm?" Or I'm like, "No, because I think it makes me a more expansive person. I think it makes me a better dad. I think it makes me a better friend. I think it makes me a better husband. Like I really do feel like I accrue real experience and wisdom through channeling these characters. And so we live in sort of dicey times with identity politics and so forth, where, certain sectors of the literary community would have me just stay in my lane. We just want you to write about old white people, like I just want a novel from you about a fat alcoholic, white novelist that's drinking beer in his garage. And it's like, why do I got to write a book about that? I'm living it. And so for 2 decades, I've made my living off of writing outside the purview of my personal experience. And to be told that I can't do that, what am I doing here then? That's what fiction is to me. It's this empathic window. That's why, as much as I love music and visual art and cinema, nothing else like the novel really asks you to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes on such an intimate level. An auteur can give us the images and sort of manipulate what we take in more, whereas the reader is always going to be your partner. They're always going to be doing what you're doing backwards and heels, and they have to picture what the character looks like. They have to picture, what it feels like. And so if I have to just write about my personal experience, or I can only write about, middle-aged white people or old white people, then I just, that to me is more threatening than like conservative people banning my book in a way,
Yeah, it's the other side of that coin. And I the publishing industry, they want everyone to stay in their lanes. And they do it for fear of
They're afraid of
you know,
everything.
stepping on a landmine. Yeah. And it's the poet Kim Stafford, who is like Yoda. Every time he speaks, like something brilliant comes out that I remember forever. And he one time said, Jamie, sometimes writing isn't about talent, it's about courage. And I was like, okay, Yoda, I'm going to write that down. Thank you. But it's true. Sometimes you have to put yourself out there and take that risk. And if you screw up, there's a price to pay. But if you pull it off, you've pulled off a great feat of empathy. And I think you should be celebrated for that. I mean,
I feel like
there's
you can't
marginalized
possibly write your best work unless you risk falling flat on your face, I mean, you play your best in a high stakes game. It's like Larry Legend, man, Larry Bird, man. That guy wants the ball with 1 second on the clock. And that's when he's going to shine and be his best. So like you talk about the sort of crippling self-doubt, and obviously this is a common theme among writers, particularly inexperienced writers, I find, like if I do a workshop or something. But like I am full of self-loathing, full of self-hatred, self-contempt, all those. But the one thing I've never lacked is self-confidence. Like, I guess because just writing the thing's an act of conceit, and I already kind of swallowed that pill. Like, I already decided I have something to say. So I've tried to unteach that to writers because I don't think, you know what I mean? I think crippling self-doubt is going to work against you because it's like a chainsaw, you know what I mean? You want to be in charge, you're going to hack off a limb. So it's always interesting to me to hear a writer like you just told me. You're very confident on the page, but to me I'm just trying to imagine like this crippling self-doubt. I get it when you feel like maybe you've bit off more than you can chew formally. Like, am I going to pull this off? Do I have too many balls in the air? But I mean, what does that look like?
I still have I would say I still have self-doubt. It's just no longer crippling. It's normal self-doubt. Like I'm a fiction judge for this year's National Book Awards, and when they asked me, my first thought was, how many people fucking canceled before they got to me? Like, it was one of those moments like, okay, surely you're scraping the bottom of the barrel before you stumbled into me. And I have to step back and just kind of laugh, be like, I'll take it under any circumstances. It's an honor, and I'm happy to do it.
Total honor, but good God, dude, how many books do you have to read? I mean, you got to read like 100 books or something. I mean, is there a committee before you that narrows it down to a certain number? I mean,
yeah, I mean, you end up. I mean, I was saying this to my wife. I'm like, this is like aversion therapy. When I'm done, I'm not sure I ever want to read again. I've read so many books this year, like. It's insane. And some have been absolutely fabulous. Like it's an incredible reading experience. But some not so much. And yeah, I think the National Book Awards are much better than the Pulitzers in that each committee or each, fiction, nonfiction, poetry.
I think they both suck because I haven't won one yet. Like something's wrong.
My thing about the Pulitzers is like with the National Book Awards, we make our own rules, each committee does, and we have our own criteria, and we choose the winner. With the Pulitzers, you read all these books, you choose the winner, you submit that to the Pulitzer board, and they can choose anything they want. So they can just go, yeah, that's nice, but, I like this book better. Thanks for, spending 9 months reading 80 books, but we're going to choose this person. And that would be time for, torches and pitchforks and shotguns. I would go crazy if I had spent all that time and they were just like, oh, thanks, appreciate that, but we're going to choose somebody else. That just feels like such a horrible bait and switch.
Hearing this, I'm like, I kind of want to be asked, but I kind of would dread being asked. Like, yeah, Well, listen, you've been listening to A Fresh Face in Hell with Jonathan Evison. Our guest today was the wonderful Jamie Ford. Jamie, thanks so much for just being vulnerable and
Dude, thanks for having me.
producing great work and just being a great dude. I encourage you to go out and read The Many Daughters of Afong Moy, along with any other Jamie's third books, Songs of Willow Frost, Hotel at the End of Bitter and Sweet. Your heart is in good hands with Jamie. Again, thank you so much about just opening up to us, talking to us about the work, about trauma, about your life. And this has been A Fresh Face in Hell with Jonathan Evison. Thank you, Jamie Ford. A Fresh Face in Hell with Jonathan Evison is brought to you by Fresh Face TV and produced by Jason Botkin and yours truly. Check us out on Instagram. Find us on YouTube. Like and subscribe. If you love the podcast, by all means, run out and buy all of Jonathan Evison's award-winning novels, available wherever books are sold.